Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Fantasy Game Plan podcast. I'm Leo Howell. I'm joined by Matt Harmon, and we missed a week, but that's okay because I would have probably told you that you shouldn't start Joe Flacco or something dumb like that last week. So, what dumb thing would you have told everyone last week, Matt, that you didn't say because we didn't have the show?
Oh, I don't even want to get into how many dumb things I could have said. I don't know. I probably would have. I don't know. I would have definitely told you to start Andre Holmes. I mean, that was something I had that right in the back pocket.
Don't pat your own back. We both have calls that we made that were really good. I told everyone that they should start LaShawn McCoy, and I would have harped on that for like 20 minutes. But
Oh no, I was just making that up. I was saying something that
I did roster Holmes in some season long and some DFS. So
Yeah, I wish I had held on to him longer in a few spaces that I drafted like before the preseason or right during the preseason when I had him, and then when it looked like things were kind of going south, I dropped him in a few spots. But most places I've been able to get him back.
yeah, I feel like that's been the way with a couple guys for me that I liked him in the preseason and kind of gave up on him and either have benched or got rid of them and kind of have been working to get him back.
Right.
I actually did that.
Some guys you just got to do it out of necessity too. You know, like it just comes that way with depth and everything. Huh.
Yeah, but so we're back for week 7, which does not feature the Buccaneers, so I won't be able to give you any awful Buccaneers advice this week. My Buccaneers advice for the rest of the year, though, target them on defense. If you've got pass catchers, if you've got quarterbacks, you want them going up against the Bucs. But anyway, we won't talk anymore about the Bucs because we are going to talk about.
And hey, Leo, don't worry, they'll be a sneaky playoff contender next year too.
I mean, this is the NFL is a very deep, talented bunch of athletes, and somehow the NFC South has a bunch of those too, and still looks like crap every week.
Yeah.
It's a shame.
It's incredible.
But what are you gonna do? We're going to talk about Week 7, but we're also going to talk on a strategy basis about daily fantasy sports. We mention it every now and again. We talk about, like, if you're playing daily, you should do this. All these different things that we kind of allude to, but we've never actually done kind of a section on daily fantasy, and so I figured that would be a good thing to do this week, particularly since there's another chance to win $1 million playing daily fantasy football available at DraftKings, their third millionaire maker in a row. In addition to all the other great sites out there, I don't. You can talk about this too because this is kind of getting into it. Is where to play. There may be some people. I doubt there's a lot of people who follow you and I that don't know where to play daily fantasy. But in case you don't, and in case you want some recommendations, neither of us are attached to any one site from a business standpoint. So this is kind of just objective, like, where do we play? I spend most of my time on FanDuel, DraftKings, and I've been using Victive a lot lately. It's a new site that has just some differences, and we'll talk about them as we go through all the basics. That just things that stand out to me about Victive that I really like. But I'm curious, what sites do you use? What sites do you like in terms of where you play daily fantasy?
Yeah, I've mostly been on FanDuel and DraftKings, which is the two biggest ones in the game.
Yeah, now that Draft Street isn't there, those are the two really. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty much those two are the heavy hitters, and that's where I spend most of my time playing. I do want to get into it's Victive, right?
Victive, yes.
Yeah. Because I was actually listening to RotoViz Radio this morning, and they had one of the representatives on there from Victive, and he was talking about it. And it does sound interesting, and I'm looking to experiment with some new platforms. I know there's another one that's supposedly going around that's supposed to be coming up, but it's hard to trust some things out there. So right now it's FanDuel and DraftKings that are the two big ones. I like. They each have their pros and cons, of course.
Definitely.
Yeah. We were talking a little bit about that before we got on the on the podcast. We were talking a little bit about that.
Yeah, but I think that's important. I think that we should rehash that in that
Yeah,
we were talking about like the look and feel of the sites and the functionality of their um, iPhone apps and things like that. Like these are becoming important things with this daily fantasy sports because for anyone not familiar, just here's the like 1 minute recap of what it is. Every week you submit a lineup or multiple lineups of players for just that week, and on most of these sites you're doing it from like a salary cap pool. And these salary cap games have been around forever. Like I used to play salary cap games on ESPN like when I was 12. You know, like they've been around forever, but now it's put into the context of a 1 week contest for there are free options like on either of the sites you can play for free, but one of the main draws is that it is a legal form of putting money on sports because it's a fantasy sport and not gambling. So you can basically wager and win money doing this, and so that's the main appeal is that it's a way to distance yourself from your season-long teams and you know throw a couple bucks out and just have some fun playing some meaningful fantasy football because those salary cap games on ESPN like you have like a 1 in 1,000 shot of winning a $200 Best Buy gift card. Whereas here, like you know, you've actually got a chance to win some legitimate money that you can then like recycle back in, or you can just pull out and do whatever you want with it. But hey, we mentioned FanDuel and DraftKings. There are several other sites that I've used. I just won't use as much because it's tough for me to balance all the differences between the sites. But there's Draft Day, there's Draftster, there's Victive, which we were talking about, and a whole bunch more. If you go to sites like Roto Grinders, I'll say Number Fire, and you'll make fun of me, and a bunch of other sites, they kind of list like salaries and strategies and have referral links to all these places that you can check out. And I'm sure if you post on Twitter, somebody will have a referral link for you so that they get money when you sign up and stuff like that. So there are plenty of ways to find places to play, but we're going to focus on FanDuel and DraftKings mainly. I think we'll both mention Victive because I think Matt's curious about it and I've played on it, so we'll talk about it a little bit too. But talk for a little bit about how you approach daily fantasy in general and just some of the things that you like about it and the ways that you kind of approach it from on a week-to-week basis.
One thing that I always look for first with daily fantasies, you know, you're always looking for value since it's a salary cap pool basis situation. So you're first looking at guys that you think can outproduce their price, and that's why from a pure playing and strategy-based perspective, I prefer DraftKings because their prices have been really reactionary this year. Seemingly, it seems to react pretty harshly to what happened the previous week, whether a player did good or bad. So if some guy that had a down week before, maybe you can get him a little cheaper than you should. And sometimes, of course, that doesn't look always as good in hindsight as it does going forward. But so I like first looking for values, but that can't be everything because you have to have some strong players. And to be clear here, I'm no expert at DFS. This is really my first year kind of pursuing it seriously, and it's been an up and down. Admittedly, it's been an up and down experience, as I think it is for most people. Despite the fact, it's one thing that I've been trying to look at daily this year. Now I'm kind of getting on a tangent here. I apologize for that, but is as much as it is, it's obviously a weekly experience and everything is new, and that's the appeal. Most of the commercials that you see, it's a new week, it's a new season every week, and all that. I have been trying to think of it as like, okay, well this week I didn't do so good, but there's another week coming. That you manage your bankroll through the whole year, so you don't go out and spend all your money in week 2 and then you come back in week 3 and you have to put X amount more dollars in there, and that's a quick way to get yourself in trouble. And so that's why you do have to sort of have a season scope of the whole thing. But just as a pure strategy basis, I like to build a complete roster normally around wide receivers, like established stud pass catchers, especially on DraftKings, which is full point PPR, which is huge. I like to build around pass catchers, and then you get into I like to find values at running back. I do. That's usually the area that I like to do, which is similar to my season-long strategy this year, which has again been an up and down experience. I will say mostly up so far, surprisingly. But yeah, so that's a really super general way of how I like to approach DFS. Looking for values first, and then trying to build a more complete roster around that. So take that for what you will.
It's interesting, and you mentioned that like the commercials say, it's a new week every week. You're not tied to your season long. You don't have to deal with the injuries and stuff like that, and that's all true. And it's even more true for me because I play DFS differently than I play season long. Like I'm not looking for the best running backs I can find, and then waiting and getting the last or cheapest quarterback like I would in a traditional league. Like it's not the same approach because it is about based on the games you're entering and the site that you're on. It's about building the best lineup with the best value and upside and the ability to exceed expectations and things like that. Those are things that you have to look into, and some of the concepts are the same as like how I would draft for an NFL 10 in terms of like guys who have big boom or bust upside in some situations, but in other times it's just it's a completely different thing. Like I've rostered Julius Thomas a bunch of times this season in daily fantasy, and I don't own any Julius Thomas in season long. I didn't draft him at all. Like he's one of the few players that across the I've probably drafted and mocked like 50 teams at least over the offseason, and he's one of the few players I do not have any of. Like I actually took Jimmy Graham for fun in a league. I took Gronkowski a couple times. I don't have any Julius Thomas, but I'll play him in daily fantasy because it's such a different context in that when I'm just looking for 1 week's worth of points out of one player, and he's got a certain salary attached to him, I'm just looking for what am I investing and what is my potential return on investment, how safe is it, what's the potential to exceed my investment and things like that. So that's kind of the approach, and so we'll go through some basics here and just kind of talk about it, and then at the end we're actually going to draft a roster live on the show, alternating picks. Matt and I, we're going to enter into a $2 tournament on DraftKings, and I'm just going to let it ride, and we'll talk about how it did next week on the show. But one of the basic. Are
we going to discuss the potential profit split off the air?
I mean, I guess we need to off the. We should do it on the air so that it's documented.
Right.
It's a $2. We'll go into this because this I think is important if you haven't played daily fantasy before. There's basically two general types of games. There are tournaments, and then there are cash games. Tournaments are kind of top heavy. It's in the commercials. If you've seen like so and so has you have a chance to win $1 million. Like that's a tournament because it's a scaled pricing that the top is heavy and only the top 10th or the top 5th of players will actually cash in that game and get any money back. The rest of the players just don't. In the Millionaire Maker, I believe there's 92,000 entries, and I believe only like 15,000 get any prizes at all. So there's 80,000 people almost that will not cash, and that's a tournament. That's a very top-heavy payment system. There are events. There's 50-50s. There's double ups. There's triple ups. There's head-to-head matchups where it's just you against one person. There are 20-team leagues where the top half all win. There's lots of different formats, but those are all considered cash games because it's not about getting the most ridiculous high potential lineup possible. It's about just getting to the halfway mark. A 50-50 is kind of as it sounds. Half of the people win and half of the people don't, and the people who win all get the same thing. It doesn't matter if you finish first or if you finish 49th. If it's 100-team 50-50 and you finish 49th, you win, and you get double your money basically, or just shy of double your money because these sites do take a rake because that's kind of what how they make money. But so in terms of that, that's how you approach your players. And so we'll talk about tournaments here for a second because that's what we're going to draft, and that's what a lot of people are drawn to at first. This is a game where we'll both make decisions. I'm sure that we wouldn't make in regular in standard fantasy football, like a week to week league. Like you'll find me putting Cordero Patterson on teams in this format. You'll find me putting Julius Thomas on teams. I'll take Peyton Manning. Because you can build your roster around, like you said, around bargains, around stud wide receivers, and you're just looking for that upside. And so I think that that's really important. And so I'm curious your thoughts when you're looking for players in these tournaments. What do you look for to find this upside? Like, are you looking at matchups? Are you looking at volume? Are you looking at market share? Are you looking at recency? Recent results? Or what kind of things are you targeting when you're looking for a guy who's going to score a ton of points for you in one of these tournament type settings?
Well, as you said, in the tournaments, they're all so top heavy that you're really looking for those guys that are going to get you to the top. I mean, you don't want a guy that's got a low floor. Well, again, you're building a balanced roster in some segments, so you have to have the low floor guys. But when you're looking for someone to take you to the top, you want them to be mostly an upside play because if you're going to be either 0 to 60. I mean, if they end up getting you squat, you probably weren't going to cash that week anyways. But if they get you, randomly get you 24 points or something like that, even in some cases more, then you've got a better chance to hit that money, which is what you're after. So I'm not only looking for guys that have that upside, but also guys that a lot of other people aren't on these contrarian plays and everything, which is important because you can't. If you're playing this guy that 90-something% of everybody else is playing, and of course that's a really big number, but a bunch of other people are playing in the tournament, it's not going to set you apart. It's not going to take you to that next level. Torrey Smith became a guy who was a pretty big contrarian play because a lot of people were off him. As the season went on, I don't really know what his ownership percentage was last week, but he had a really great matchup. He's always a guy that can take a play over the top with his speed and everything, and in that offense, and it finally came to fruition last week. He scored a bunch of points, caught the 2 touchdowns right away over the against Buccaneers, as you know well. So that's an example right there of a guy who also wasn't priced too high, who you could get that, and then hope that a bunch of other people aren't on him, so that it sets your lineup apart while also being a high scoring one.
Yeah, you're right. Torrey Smith was actually owned a little more than you think last week,
Right.
and that's kind of the thing that I don't focus too much on is this idea of being super contrarian.
Mm-hmm.
This is an idea you hear a lot in daily fantasy, and it's not one that I subscribe to on the same level as some people in that they'll ignore players because they feel like they need to find a more contrarian play. Torrey Smith was owned in 6.5% of the teams in the Millionaire Maker. 6.5 doesn't seem like a lot, but 6.5% of 92,000 is actually a lot.
Mm-hmm.
That would be what? 6,000 teams?
God,
7,000 teams? Something like that. So that's a lot of people who picked Torrey Smith. But yeah, like you said, like there's a team that finished 8th in that tournament and won a lot of money with Torrey Smith and Joe Flacco. And that's another thing we'll discuss stacking here in a little bit because I feel like that's important. But on the first place team, the team that won is JQuave76 is the username on DraftKings. Went with Joe Flacco, Lamar Miller, Andre Holmes. Those are 3 players that were all owned by less than 3% of the teams in the tournament.
Right.
But the rest of his roster, Brandon Oliver, who's owned by almost a third of the teams. So that means 30,000 people picked Brandon Oliver. But it's one of those situations where not all the time do you have to go contrarian because if a highly owned guy does well, then you're not going to be able to pass everybody else who has him. And Brandon Oliver is the perfect example of that last week going up against the Oakland Raiders, the only back, really, that the San Diego Chargers had. And, he showed a lot of promise the week before, and he got that late touchdown for the Chargers, and that really, paid off for people who rostered him. The winning lineup also had Jordy Nelson, who was 12% owned, had Julius Thomas, who was 15% owned, and had Mohamed Sanu, who was 16% owned. So, like, there are tens of thousands of people who had similar players, it's not always about going contrarian. Like the Joe Flacco, the Lamar Miller, and the Andre Holmes were a little under the radar, and you do have to do that in these tournament settings. Is that you have to find a way to differentiate yourself, and I feel like that's more important. It's not all about being contrarian. It's about being different enough. And even if that's just in your combinations, the great example was Al Smizzle, Al Zeidenfeld, who is a DraftKings pro and works with Roto Grinders as well. He won a tournament 2 weeks ago in which he had 3 Broncos pass catchers and did not have Peyton Manning as his quarterback. And that gives you such a. It doesn't seem like a big deal. Like that doesn't seem like something that would set you apart. But it was the week when Russell Wilson's price was very low, and so he took Russell Wilson at quarterback instead of Peyton Manning. And traditionally, what you do in a tournament is that if you really believe in a wide receiver or you really believe in a quarterback, you want to pair the quarterback with the wide receiver or the wide receiver with the quarterback because that maximizes your potential in that every time that duo matches up, you're getting double the points. Like if the winning lineup put together Steve Smith and Joe Flacco, and so the 5 catches for 110 yards and a touchdown that Steve Smith got, Joe Flacco also got, and so you're getting double points every time that happens, and it's a statement of belief in that matchup in that situation that really goes a long way in these tournaments. So. But Al didn't do that in his tournament, and that helped to differentiate him because there were probably a lot of lineups out there that had Peyton Manning, Demaryius Thomas, Julius Thomas, Emmanuel Sanders, guys like that. His had the receivers, but not the quarterback. He took Russell Wilson, and that was the week that Russell ran for over 100 yards, and that's huge in fantasy football. So I feel like that differentiating yourself and creating lineups that you just don't think other people are going to make is way more important than just finding the contrarian plays, because like you could play Mike Glennon at quarterback, you could play Kirk Cousins at quarterback, even if they're not in a good matchup, that'll differentiate yourself. And sure, both of those guys could throw for 3 touchdowns, but you're limiting your odds a little bit when you're, I'm not going to play Joyke Bell when Reggie Bush is out because everyone's going to do that. I'm not going to play Brandon Oliver because he's the only running back in San Diego and he's cheap. I'm not going to play Mohamed Sanu. I got burnt on that last week. I did not play Mohamed Sanu because I figured that he was going to be in everyone's lineup. I didn't follow my own advice, and it burned me because he had a huge week. So I really feel like being different is what's important in these tournament games.
Yeah, I think you can't, obviously, like you were saying, you can't have a whole lineup full of contrarian plays because there's probably a reason that they're contrarian.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's absolutely. That's the thing right there. Like you can't have a whole bunch of these guys because you're more often than not you're gonna end up with a stinker than that high hit. And I like to be a little bit safer than that since I'm playing with my money here. But you have to. That's what it's kind of important to have that balanced roster. Just even more so in daily fantasy than in the season log league sometimes because you get this. It's a 1-week shot. And yeah, you don't want to. You got to have these guys. Fading is the popular term for it, right? Yeah, right. That's the cool little term for it. That I don't. You're right. There's some holes in that idea that I don't really go with as much as I do like to have. At least 2, sometimes 3 contrarian plays in these big tournaments. More often than not, 2 maybe at most. But yeah, so that's usually the max, and that's kind of a good thing to emphasize there. Is you got to have that balance. It's all about that.
Definitely. Well, let's go ahead and this will kind of be an answer to a sarcastic question that we received on Twitter from Shane Alexander at A1G Football. Tweeted me and tweeted at both of us and asked, how do I win $1 million playing college football DFS? Well, we can't tell you that, but we can tell you possibly how to win $1 million playing NFL football DFS. If you want to win playing college football DFS, you need to go talk to Davis Maddock and the crew over at Fantasy Insiders because I basically watched them and played their picks last week and won money. So shout out to Fantasy Insiders. Go check them out if you want college football fantasy information. They do Google Hangouts all the time, and they are fantastic. But we're going to talk about NFL, and we're actually going to draft the team here live on the air. Nobody responded to my poll question to determine who votes first. So
Right on that better.
as the humble host, I will allow Matt the first pick here. We're going to pick on DraftKings on the NFL $2 league. This is just one that I already entered for myself, but now we're going to enter it together, Matt and I. It is a 575-person tournament. You enter for $2, and the top prize is $200, and then everyone 100th place and above cashes. So almost the top sixth will cash. So this is a tournament, but it's not an extreme one, and it's obviously low stakes. And what we'll do here, just so that it's on the record, Matt, if we win, if we cash at all, I will give you, if we cash under $10, and since you're picking first, I'll give you all of that $10 or less.
Oh, stop it.
But if we cash more than that, then we'll split it 50-50 because it will be equal contributions. But I want you to feel appreciated because I make fun of you all the time. So
yeah, I think the making fun of is pretty mutual. And enjoyable.
It is.
Mine's a little more.
But I also feel like I was also setting it up to say I also feel like your bankroll probably is a little lighter than mine because you suck at DFS. So I was gonna charity.
That's lovely. Actually, it's a little light because I'm making a move into my new apartment here, so I'm having to be conservative and patient.
But you could have won money over these past few weeks, and you apparently didn't.
Anyways, let's just move right on forward.
Okay, so you can pick whatever position. You don't have to start with quarterback. You can if you want. Just give us a guy that you want to throw on this roster, and I'll have to adapt as we go, and hopefully we don't break the bank and wind up with too much salary.
All right, yeah, let's do this. There's actually 3 running backs, and I'm gonna go with running backs right off the bat. There's 3 running backs that jump off the page to me that are at good prices that I like a lot as volume plays and in good offenses for running the ball. One of them is Lamar Miller. I think that Miller now, I mean, we know the running back picture in the NFL is so dicey. And I mean, it's like, are there even 15 guys you can really rely on at this point in the running back position week to week? Not really. I mean, it's a mess. But Miller now at this point, this backfield is pretty much his now officially for the rest of the season with Noshawn Moreno being out for the year, and it already kind of has been at this point. But I feel like he's a sort of steady producer that I do like to have, because I know he's going to get volume in an offense that runs the ball pretty well. Their offensive line is getting guys like Mike Pouncey back. They're going against Chicago, which is a defense that it's right now I see they're 7th against against running backs on DraftKings. Is that the figure I'm looking at? Which is obviously high, but they're not a defense that I really fear playing a running back against. It's a matchup that I think Miller can do well in. And again, DraftKings full PPR. Miller does catch some passes out of the backfield.
He has at least 2 in every game.
Right. Yeah. So I think he represents a good start at a floor-based option. So Miller, I think, is gonna, and he's a good price too. He's
only $53,000. It's a $55,555 cap or something like that. So
right.
That's basically a tenth of your salary, and you only fill 9 positions, and one of them is defense, which is typically below that average. Yeah. So that is a good start. And I can agree with that. I think we're both on the same page here. I'm going to go quarterback. I'm going to go ahead and give us a quarterback. Matthew Stafford is 7,000 on DraftKings this week. He is playing the New Orleans Saints in Detroit. The Saints are a mess on defense right now, and that is way too cheap for Matthew Stafford, even with Megatron not playing. He is a little Megatron dependent, I will admit that, but that defense is so bad, and he's still got Golden Tate, he's got Eric Ebron, he's got guys who can score touchdowns, and if he scores 3 touchdowns at that price, he's met his value, and that's below average for quarterbacks. Just for reference, Andrew Luck is 9,700, Peyton Manning is 9,000. Joe Flacco is 7,700. Tony Romo is 7,200. Like Stafford, the only viable starters below him are Russell Wilson, Matt Ryan, Colin Kaepernick, and Alex Smith. Like those are the only guys below him that you'd really consider starting, and on that level. Like there are a couple other guys that I'll probably start because I'm crazy about quarterbacks, and I like Brian Hoyer, and I'm probably the only person who does. But we're going to go with Matthew Stafford there with that second pick. Because that's a cheap quarterback, and a cheap quarterback can open up a lot of options for you, particularly in a tournament setting where you do want to maybe roster a couple of big-name receivers who can give you those 40-point days.
Yeah, Stafford always makes me nervous in DFS.
Me too. Me too. It's not Eli Manning nervous, though.
Oh, well, yeah, that's that.
Because I did that last week. I started Eli Manning in a bunch of rosters, and that was bad.
Yeah. Oh man, I'm sorry. That stinks. Yeah. So I mean, Stafford makes me nervous, but one thing that I like is that you pointed out that it's New Orleans away from the dome. Not that the defense really has made much of a difference whether they're home or away.
Yeah.
But in general, I like playing players. I like using players in my lineup. That sounds better. That are at home as opposed to away. I mean, sometimes that doesn't work. I mean, Joe Flacco and the Ravens had such a big game when they're. I'm sorry to keep harping back on that game. I really don't mean to do it.
No, I honestly don't care. I wish I would have rostered Joe Flacco. I did roster Torrey Smith in a couple lineups. So
right, yeah. I mean, it's too bad the Bucs aren't playing since they're.
I know. If they were playing TCU, I'd start Trevon Boykin. Like at this point, I'm streaming whoever plays against the Bucs.
Yeah, so I mean, sometimes, and my point is that was an away game for Flacco, and it obviously went really well. But in general, I especially when we get to defenses, I much prefer playing guys that are at home than away. It's just in general, it's a little bit of a safer bet. Unless they're a terrible team, they're not going to get their doors blown off at home.
But go ahead with your second pick then.
Okay, yes, I'll stop talking a little bit here. So you mentioned Brian Hoyer. And last week, he finally got great production from Jordan Cameron, and I think we're going to slot him into our tight end spot if you're quite all right with that. He's going against the Jaguars, which we know they're a terrible defense. Pretty much you could start any. We might go back to running backs. Ben Tate is another running back I like this week. I like a lot. Almost anybody playing the Jaguars is a good bet. Cameron was on the Sunday hangout that I do with Sportable. We have T.J. Hernandez on, that's actually not me. Someone that's actually a great DFS resource is T.J. Hernandez. He really knows what he's doing, knows the ins and out of it, and he's on every Sunday morning with us. And I asked him about Jordan Cameron. I had Jordan Cameron in a lot of lineups, and it worked really well. He had the one long touchdown. He could have honestly had two. He's just now getting healthy, and he's obviously the most talented player on that offense. And he's still pretty cheap this week. He's a full $1,000 more expensive than he was last week when he was $3,600, I think. Now he's $4,600, but that's still a pretty good price from. Honestly, we talked about it before the season. The three guys who were in that elite tier were, Graham, Gronk, Thomas. I think Jordan Cameron is just as talented as those guys. So I think you get a great ceiling from Cameron at a pretty good price.
There are some other tight ends I like, but I'm not going to break our rules here already, and I'm not going to try to object when you may make a worse pick later that I'll have to override. So no, I'm totally okay with that. I'm going to go ahead and I shouldn't bring this up. I really shouldn't, because this is another non-original idea, but I'm going to do it anyway. Among the daily fantasy sports community, there is a new trend known as Narrative Street. This is another Davis Maddock original, but it's basically the idea that, and this mainly goes for NBA, but they've started using it in NFL too, and it does apply sometimes, is that players who have some sort of narrative reason to play harder, to play better, are better plays, particularly in daily fantasy. It's that kind of birthdays and bobbleheads thing in baseball and in basketball that you hear about, like when guys are on their birthday or playing in their hometown or things like that, that sometimes they play better. And in basketball, when it's the 82-game season, and that gives them motivation to actually play hard when they probably don't play hard every week, that's one thing. In football, it doesn't happen as much, but we're going to go down that well with this pick here because I'm going to go with Brandon Marshall playing at home against the Dolphins. It's a good matchup, but it's not a great matchup. But Marshall is a candidate for so much regression after these past 2 weeks. He had that 3-touchdown game where he was playing on broken legs, and since then he's slowly been working his way back into the lineup, and he's only scored once in his last 4 games, and that is so atypical for Brandon Marshall. And this is a game where we've got Lamar Miller on the other side. We feel like the Dolphins are going to be in this game enough to run, which means that the Bears are going to be in this game enough to continue to throw, and that keeps Marshall relevant, and that's why I want him in this lineup. And it's a revenge game against a team that he played for and didn't really have a lot of positive memories from. So we're going to go with Brandon Marshall. He is actually pretty reasonably priced at 6,300, which is a little more than Miller, a little less than Stafford. It's a little above our average, but we're still sitting at got nearly 27,000 in salary left, with 3 skill position spots and a flex left. So definitely plenty of money left to fill out the roster. But we're gonna go with Marshall. Do you have any objections to Brandon Marshall?
No. As soon as you said Narrative Street, and I started just kind of flipping through my mind and the players, I was like, I bet she's gonna pick Brandon Marshall. So I think that's a good call.
I didn't roll with the Bobby Rainey revenge game last week, and I'm kind of glad I didn't because he only got like 42 yards. The Ravens cut him, I guess, or didn't re-sign him or something, but I didn't go with that. Another one that we aren't going with is Peyton Manning chasing a record. That definitely qualifies as a narrative thing, but it would have been really tough for us to try to fit Peyton Manning into a lineup that we were picking back and forth because you really got to pick bargains at a couple spots to fit a guy like that.
Last week I went with Peyton Manning pretty much everywhere because he was facing the Jets, and it just didn't.
Well, I mean, you still a bad Peyton Manning week still gives you something. Like he didn't tank, he just didn't do as well as you would have liked.
Right, he did, but he didn't carry the team enough to
to justify
to compensate for the other positions where I had to skimp at, and where some worked out, some didn't. You're right. That's the problem with having to. I don't know, with having to overspend. I don't want to say overspend, but spend so much on a quarterback.
To pay up for a guy like that, absolutely.
Right. Okay.
So we got Matthew Stafford, Lamar Miller, Brandon Marshall, Jordan Cameron. Who are you adding to this lineup?
Good question. I tell you, I'm really tempted to go back to the well with Andre Holmes. Because he's just going to be so. I'm not. Don't pencil that in yet. I'm just batting the idea around in my head because he's
just taking a look.
Because he's so cheap, and he's got the Cardinals have given up a ton of work through the air. They let Deshaun Jackson run all over them. Pierre Garçon's another one who's cheap, playing against the Titans at home. I feel like he's a candidate for a bounce back week target wise, but I don't even know if I want to. I'm not even married necessarily to a wide receiver. I don't really have any great answers off the top of my head, so I'm actually going to go back to running backs. And this is I said there was 3 running backs off the top of my head who I really liked. Ben Tate was the other one, but I'm not going to go with Tate. I'm going to go with a third guy, and that's Justin Forsett, who I also feel like is at a good price. And he's 5,600, which is it's right around mid-range. You'd think of all these top running backs, it's decent price. But he's a guy who's in a good running game. And we mentioned with Miller, the backfield is all his. Same with Forsett at this point. I think we just kind of have to come around to the idea that this is his backfield. I think they gave Pierce 15 carries last week. He didn't do anything with them except he scored that late touchdown or whatever. But Forsett's the starter in the offense, and they're playing the Falcons, who, in case you missed it, is a terrible defense. Baltimore is at home, and again, full point PPR. Forsett catches the ball out of the backfield. Really, he had a great week against some nice runs against the Bucs last week, but it was kind of a disappointment because he got pulled. I mean, the game got out of hand so quickly, and other guys started to try to get going. But yeah, so I think Forsett is another safe pick at running back.
No, absolutely. He gets a lot of their red zone looks. He gets receptions and carries. It's a lot like Miller. It is a lot like Miller, except he does have some competition that, like I honestly feel like if Miller fumbles this week, he doesn't hit the bench. If Justin Forsett fumbles, he might hit the bench. But that's a risk that you have to be willing to take, and I'm totally cool with taking it because yes, you want to target the Falcons with your offensive players, and it is Baltimore at home. But it's not going to be a blowout. It shouldn't be a blowout because the Falcons' offense should be able to hang in that game. So I do like that pick, and he is a very good price that keeps us, kind of in line with what we want to do in terms of our spending. I'm going to do something here that this is going to kind of set you up for some more. Some more opportunities to make some picks and just to kind of set our outlook on how much salary we have left. I'm going to pick a defense. And I'm actually going to go with actually, first I'll explain how I approach defense. I basically go to the bottom of the defense salaries list and work my way up and try to find the first team that I can tolerate starting. Because the differences in what a good defense is and what a great defense is in daily fantasy usually comes down to touchdowns, and there's no way to predict that. You cannot predict when a defense special teams will score touchdowns. It's just impossible. You can go with narrative stuff, like if Devin Hester was chasing a record or something, like then you'd start the Falcons. But the Falcons' defense is bad, so you don't want to do that because their defensive numbers are gonna drag you down. With that in mind, I'm actually going to go with the Minnesota Vikings defense. They're playing at Buffalo, and they are at 2,800, which is well below all of the figures we've been talking about so far. The reason I'm doing this is because the Buffalo offense is just not going to put up enough points to get into any sort of it's issues where we're losing points because we're using the Minnesota defense. They do have Cordero Patterson returning kicks and punts, so if we're trying to predict a touchdown, that's a situation where that's a guy who could certainly do it. And the Buffalo offense is just not, it's not going to be, turnover free. You can get sacks against an immobile quarterback like Orton. So there's a lot of situations there for that, and they're just so cheap. They are, at 2,800, the top defenses are at like 34, 33, and that doesn't seem like a lot, but $500 at another spot could be the difference between, getting a difference maker and getting a lesser player. So just like for reference, the difference between Dez Bryant and Mohamed Sanu is $500. So saving that $500 on your defense could allow you to spend up at that spot. So I'll go ahead and pick a defense. And unless you make another pick, we have 2 wide receiver spots and a flex left, and we can average about 6,000 per player. But if you want to spend up for one, you can definitely do that as well.
All right. Well, yeah, that's a good call on the defense. Yeah, I like what you said. Start at the bottom, work your way up. That's about exactly the way I do it too. And so I'm going to go to wide receiver, and I think I'm going to give us the stack with Calvin Johnson and Matthew Stafford. Oh wait, that's right. He's hurt. Sorry. just a little mirth in there while we're picking a serious lineup here. All right. Actually, no, for real. Since we've had some good bargains here, I think I'm gonna pay up for a pretty good wide receiver. Yeah, I'm actually gonna go with. I think I'm going to go. I'm debating. You can and feel free to jump in here and help me settle this because I'm debating between Jordy Nelson at Carolina, or well, it's at Green Bay. And they're playing. They're playing Carolina or Antonio Brown. That's another one that I always like on DraftKings because the full PPR, he always catches a bunch of passes. Honestly, even Demaryius Thomas is a good bet. Against San Francisco, Denver's at home. That might be the call. So feel free to jump in here. I'm personally leaning Thomas. If it was me, I think that's the way I would go.
Well, here's another resource that I use sometimes that we can discuss here, and that is point spread.
Oh
Looking
yeah, perfect.
at Vegas lines and seeing what Vegas thinks will be the highest scoring games. The team with the highest team total in Vegas this week is Denver. They are projected to score over 4 touchdowns. Um, Green Bay is projected to, or projected, not projected. They are have the odds set at scoring 28, so that is 4 touchdowns as well. That's just a little behind, whereas Pittsburgh is only at 24. So Vegas doesn't see that as a big game. And Brown is the safer play because, like you said, he's just so consistent, and those 5 to 7 catches are just automatic points every week. I do think that game should be low scoring, though. I do agree with Vegas in that game should be low scoring, and that it may be a game that they're controlling, the Steelers, with how the Texans have been playing lately. So I definitely think the choice is between Jordy and Demaryius if you want to pay up for a receiver at the very top here. Obviously, there's Des Bryant, there's I guess Randall Cobb, some other guys that have high prices. But if you want to go to the top of the top, those are the two best options. And I would go with Demaryius because of Peyton's situation. I feel like even if that game gets out of hand, he's going to stay on the field to chase the record until they get 4 touchdowns.
Yeah.
And so I would like to have a piece of that. And since we've already got a tight end, we can't roster or Julius Thomas. I guess we could in the flex, I guess, but we're probably not going to. I would go with Demaryius. So that would be my input on that.
Yeah, I think that's the call. That's, like I said, that's the way I was leaning. Honestly, it's a good resource that you brought up, the point spread, because that is one that is really wise to use. And again, I'm not scared of San Francisco secondary.
No.
But I don't think anybody is. They've allowed plenty of big plays. But one note on Brown, we were right to say that he's the consistent play, but I'm getting pretty annoyed with this Pittsburgh offense. I've ranted about it a little bit, but oh man, I've had about enough. And I don't do a lot of bashing of offensive coordinators, but right now I will say I'm pretty sick of the way that Pittsburgh offense is going. So I am kind of tending to shy away from it. Not that I think it's going to turn into a disaster, but just banking on them to perform has burned me a few times this year. So that's all. That's all I'll say on that.
Well, we need some play that's going to offset the big spending just a little bit, so that we've got plenty of money left to spend on our flex. So I'm actually going to pick our last wide receiver, and where is he? Yeah, he's right here. I'm going to go with Reggie Wayne. Reggie Wayne is playing at home against the Bengals, who are coming off a week where they allowed 37 points to the Panthers. And they're just not as good on pass defense as they were last year. There are some holes there that a guy like Andrew Luck is going to exploit, because they're just going to have to throw in this game, because it's not going to be a game like against Jacksonville where they can line up with 4 tight ends and 15 fullbacks and try to just run the ball and throw bootleg passes like Pep Hamilton is wont to do. They're going to have to throw the ball, and Reggie Wayne is a guy that you can definitely rely on to get you some PPR points, but also to score. That's a guy that is currently on the season sitting with 1 touchdown in 6 games, and that's going to change. He is going to score more than that. They have tight ends that they throw to. T.Y. Hilton has broken some long plays and things like that. It's time for Wayne to score, and his price is going way down. He's been over 5,000 every week so far. He is now at 4,900 for this week because the Cincinnati defense is dragging down his price, and that's a situation to take advantage of because they're not as good of a defense as you'd think. So I'm going to put Reggie Wayne in our last wide receiver spot, which gives us 5,500 left for the flex spot. So we need any skill position player for under $5,500, and we'll kind of pick this one together since we both picked 2 to this point. Let me go ahead and put this out there.
I go ahead. Go ahead, because I think I know where you're going with this.
You do know where I'm going with this, but we're not going to do it, and I'll say why too. Fred Jackson, my favorite football player in the world, is 5,500. Would completely zero out our lineup, perfect efficient lineup. But we have the Vikings as our defense, and so we're banking on that not being a high-scoring game. And even though Fred Jackson could net us a good game and still have a good game from the Vikings, we're not going to do that because this is a tournament setting, and we're kind of digging into our own profits there, and we don't want to do that. So we are not going to go with Fred Jackson. So we will move further down the list. Some of the other options, and we'll just run through these real quick. We've got Greg Olson, who is an option that I definitely would consider here, even though he's a tight end, playing him in the flex. We've got Ruben Randall. We've got Ben Tate, Cecil Shorts III, Pierre Garçon, Michael Floyd, James Jones, Terrence Williams, Andre Johnson, Reggie Bush are some of the names. Do any of those names stand out to you? Or maybe we can even go a little lower on the list, and then maybe turn some of that extra money back into our upgrading our defense or something like that.
Yeah, the two names that jump out to me, I mentioned Tate several times. That would be one that's a play I would consider putting in the flex.
When you say that, let me interject real quick just to say we've already got Jordan Cameron, and I feel weird about doing running back pass catcher from the same team just because it does kind of cut into your potential. If you want the team to have a good day on the ground, it's unlikely that Cameron's going to do anything, and vice versa. So you could still get the touchdowns because Cameron's so cheap that if he scores once with 50 yards, he meets his value.
And it is possible. I mean, it worked out last week that Tate had a pretty decent game, and Cameron obviously had a really explosive outing. So it is possible. But you're right. We don't necessarily have to do that. It's one name that sticks out to me. Pierre Garçon, I've already mentioned. He's a guy that I feel like also a lot of people probably aren't going to be on at this point. I think the idea is kind of circulating that Cousins prefers Jackson, and maybe he does, but I still think Garçon is bound to get his at some point. They're at home this week. He could, and when he's on, when he has those games where he's playing well, he does just get peppered with targets. He's a guy who also has big playability, so he could always take one over the top. That's one I like there.
Let me present a name to you. It's a little further down the list that we would then turn our extra money into upgrading our defense a little bit. And that is Larry Fitzgerald. He's at 4,800 and he is playing the Oakland Raiders. Carson Palmer's back, and we saw that with his 6 for 98 and a touchdown last week. Obviously, Fitzgerald was kind of ignored in that opening game against San Diego, and everyone was mad like crazy about it. But what are your thoughts on maybe Larry Fitzgerald?
I don't know. I'm not crazy about
Fitzgerald.
Yeah, not really.
For that same price,
go ahead.
For that same price, we could go on the other side of that same matchup and roster and Andre Holmes, like you were talking about earlier.
We could.
I'm totally fine with that as well.
I like that. And two more. Let me just throw out two more. See if either of these catch your fancy. And these are lower down the list too. One tight end, Vernon Davis. The Broncos are pretty bad against tight ends. I'm not a big Vernon Davis fan either, but Broncos are bad against tight ends. They just lost Danny Trevathan.
His health is just too
right
for me. I feel like he's any one play away from just leaving the field, and
sure,
that offense just doesn't really appeal to me from a daily fantasy perspective.
Certainly,
it is a good matchup for their passing game, but even still,
Yeah, I hear you. So that's one I wanted to throw out, and kind of in the same vein, another just throw it out there. Let me see how you feel about it. I'm not totally buying it either, but Eddie Lacy against Carolina. I'm not a big Eddie Lacy fan at this point anymore either, but I think he could have a decent week against. Okay. I just want to throw.
I'm pretty sure. Like I've lost some weight lately. I've been getting back into shape. I think that I've actually finally reached the point where I could now run the 40-yard dash twice before Eddie Lacy finished it once.
No, you can't.
No, but seriously, I'm not like that. Is that a kind of good matchup? Sure, but I'm not buying it. I think we need to go with Andre Holmes here.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think we can settle with Holmes.
Okay, and so then that leaves us 700 left, which we have to use to upgrade our defense. So now we're going to go to the top of the defense list. We can't go with Arizona against Oakland because we just picked Andre Holmes. How about the inverse of the matchup we were looking at before? How about Buffalo hosting
Yeah,
Minnesota?
I was gonna say I think that if we're going at the top of the list for defense, that's the one that stands out to me. I like Bridgewater, but he was rattled last week. That offensive line is
Yeah,
terrible.
and Buffalo will continue to exploit that because they do have some quality pass rushers. So
Indeed, they do.
that makes our final roster: Matthew Stafford, Lamar Miller, Justin Forsett, Brandon Marshall, Demarius Thomas, Reggie Wayne, Jordan Cameron, Andre Holmes, and the Buffalo Bills defense and special teams. I have just submitted that to DraftKings. It is in their servers, stored for all of eternity. Actually, just for as long as it takes for them to cash out the game. Um, and so we will play that out. I'll post it on Twitter. You guys can ask us questions. You can comment on it. You can make fun of us if the lineup completely tanks. But I'm happy with it. I may not have made some of the picks you did, but I still feel like this is a good enough lineup where I didn't have to use any veto power as the person clicking the buttons over here. And so we will keep you guys updated on how that roster turns out. And
Wait,
obviously, if you have any questions about it or just plays in general on DraftKings, I'm sure that, or any site, I'm sure that Matt and I will be happy to help.
when you picked Reggie Wayne, that was the one to me that was like I totally see your logic. And I was like, oh, that's such a Leo pick. So,
It's probably JJ's influence on me, but we just like old players. Like if it were up to me, like my entire roster would be 32 or older. But
oh my
uh,
god.
no, it's just coincidence that the numbers that we work with every day, and the way that we approach stuff, we like basically it's really just Reggie Wayne and Fred Jackson. But people like to say that JJ likes a bunch of old players, so
Yeah.
whatever. But this is interesting, so we will see how this does. I'm also looking at my PGA lineups, which is a good chance to remind you that daily fantasy is not just for football. If you are into pretty much any sport, you could probably find daily fantasy for it. There is soccer, there is golf, there is college football, there is Major League Baseball, there is basketball, there's college basketball when that comes around, I think. There's tons of options. So if you're into a sport, there's probably a daily fantasy option for it. DraftKings has the most selection of sports, but FanDuel does offer some other sports as well, and some of the other sites too. So, any closing thoughts from you? We've kind of already done a week preview by talking about all these players, so I don't feel like we need to go position by position because we've already kind of pointed out some players that we like this week and some matchups that we like the fact that we like Andre Holmes means that Derek Carr may be a sneaky play this week. The fact that we like a guy like Brandon Marshall means that Jay Cutler's fine to play this week. The fact that we like Demarius Thomas, obviously, we like Peyton Manning. Justin Forsett, if you've got Bernard Pierce or Lorenzo Taliaferro and you're in a deep league, obviously you can play them. Just, extrapolate off of that and tweet us if you have any questions. But do you have any closing thoughts, Matt?
Yeah, no, I think this is a fun format. Got to get a lot of thoughts out there into the air.
I didn't get to talk much about Victiv, unfortunately. We'll have to do that off the air, where I can tell you a little bit more about Victiv, or we can talk about it on another show because there's so much to. This is not an exhaustive strategy show for daily fantasy sports. So,
right, definitely not.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, this was cool. In general, just kind of want to reiterate that this is for season long leagues, this is really getting into kind of do or die time where you ought to know where the direction of your team is. It's a question that I'm having to contemplate in a lot of my leagues. Some of them I'm good, where I'm you're 5-1, you're feeling fine. Others, like the one I know, the ESPN one where you mentioned Shane, I'm in a lot of trouble in that league. I have a terrible roster that scored like 40 points last week because I had a lot of Saints on buys and the team is in general pretty terrible. You're also 6-0 in that league, I think, so I'll pat you on the back there.
I am. That is one of my best leagues.
You have Arian Foster and DeMarco Murray.
Exactly. It is one of my. I took the risk on the running backs, and it paid off because it is a deeper league. So that was my thought: is that I'm going to sink or swim with these guys, and that's what happened.
And you know what? That's another thing that we talk about strategy. This show is supposed to be pretty strategy based. While I think that there's been a lot of validity in the zero running back strategy thing, it's worked in other spots for me, not particularly in this league. I picked a lot of the wrong players. Whereas you went running back early, and while a lot of people went running back early got burned, you went there for guys that had question marks coming into the season, and look, it worked out, and so that's something that it's an idea that people say a lot, and I just want to reiterate here. Strategy is great. You got to
not only did I go early running back in that league, but I also went late round quarterback even in the 16-team league.
Yeah, aren't you starting Austin Davis?
Austin Davis is my starting quarterback. Yes. Maybe not this week against Seattle. I haven't decided yet if I'm going to try to swap him out, but DeMarco Murray, Andre Johnson, Torrey Smith, Anquan Bolden, Fred Jackson. Like, this is not a loaded lineup, but in a deep league, like, those names sound awful, but when you put Arian Foster and DeMarco Murray and their ridiculous production with just average players at other positions in a deep league, you usually have an advantage unless you just get unlucky on a given week and just meet some juggernaut. So yeah, definitely very happy with how that team has gone. I think I've scored the most points in the league too. I have.
What all this means is that I should trade you Josh Gordon to take you to the next level, and you should give me a few players to help me save my season.
We'll talk about it off the air. No, but I actually was looking at our MFL 10 the other day, and I'm pretty sure that I had the worst week imaginable for an MFL 10 because my team and the MFL 10 that we're in together is just brutal bad. Actually, let me pull it up real quick. I know you guys don't really care, but if you got to the end of the show, then you get to deal with this. So
good job.
Because this is one of the only MFL 10s where I drafted Sammy Watkins. So he's actually my second leading wide receiver behind Pierre Garçon. Because I've got AJ Green, so that's injuries. That's not really like my fault there. Percy Harvin, Brian Hartline, and Justin Hunter. My quarterbacks are Jake Locker, Eli Manning, Alex Smith. But this is the best part. Listen to these running backs. Monty Ball, hurt. Reggie Bush, hurt. Ray Rice, not in the NFL. Kyrie Robinson, okay. D'Angelo Williams, hurt. Danny Woodhead, on IR.
Oh my God.
Kyrie Robinson is my only running back right now who is not injured or out of the league.
Wow. So did you even have a running back score last week?
No, I did not. I did not have. Well, no. Yeah, no, I didn't. I didn't.
Because all those guys were hurt, or
and Robinson was on bye. Yeah, so no, I didn't. And then my tight ends are Scott Chandler, Adrian Robinson, and Levine Toilolo.
What's wrong with you?
And I didn't even get anything from like my kickers and my defenses. Like, it was just like I think I scored 70 points, which for an MFL 10 is just
disgusting.
Disgusting. It is the worst. So, yeah. So you're beating me in that league, I'm pretty sure. If you're not, you should be thoroughly embarrassed because that may be the worst MFL 10 roster on the entire. Like, I need to tweet at my fantasy league and say, is there a team worse than mine? Please give me a free ticket for next year because I
deserve it.
I do after all that. Like, I've got probably too much Ray Rice, but I felt like he was falling too far. But
well, you drafted Brian Hartline, so that's what you get.
Dude,
the Dolphins just need to use him right, huh?
No, the Dolphins just need to not have Ryan Tannehill at quarterback and have someone capable of throwing to one of the best slot receivers in football, possession receivers in football.
That's an interesting conversation we could have sometime where we think about Brian Hartline, or not Brian Hartline. We should not think anything about Brian Hartline. I don't think about Brian Hartline, but Ryan Tannehill.
Yeah, right. I need to watch some more of him, but I've not been excited about what I see. But anyway, that'll do it. For this week's edition of the Fantasy Game Plan. Join us next week. We'll talk about DFS again. I feel like this was good, and we'll do it again. We'll talk about Victiv. We'll do a FanDuel lineup and talk about kickers because, as you may have noticed, FanDuel does not, or DraftKings does not use kickers. FanDuel does. So we may do a little quicker segment next week and then get to some of your questions and do some previews as well. So for Matt, who actually go ahead and, since we haven't put up our lower thirds or told everybody where we're from, talk about where people can find you and what you've been up to.
Oddly enough, I've called myself a shameless self-promoter who loves attention, I did forget to put my lower third up tonight. Oh, man.
Are you going to blame that on your moving too?
Yeah, I will, because I was rushing around to get on.
Did you leave it at your old place, your lower third?
That's funny. It's moderately funny. But anyways, no. So yeah, you can find me on Twitter at MattHarmon_BYB. I have a lot of fun going back and forth with people over there. So if you want to follow me, you can. And I write for Football Guys. I've been doing mostly there. I do the roundtable stuff with the staff, and also reception perception stuff, which is it's just evaluating wide receivers, trying to put a fantasy spin on it. It's all kind of revolving data, as I like to say. So whatever. And then other than that, scout for Optimum Scouting, looking at the Mountain West over there this year, and also write weekly Panthers columns for Black and Blue Review, amongst other things. I do a lot of stuff. So yeah.
Speaking of the Panthers, I wrote about Greg Olson today for numberfire.com, which is a website that I write for. I also write for rotogrinders.com, and I write for Bucks Nation, but not for very long. So if you care about the Bucks, which you probably don't, even if you're a fan, you probably don't care anymore because they're not making the playoffs again, and they're probably going to have another high draft pick, and they probably hired the wrong coach. Yeah, so you can go to Bucks Nation and check out their stuff, and I'm still there for the time being. But I will be focusing more on fantasy and general NFL, which you can find at Numberfire and Roto Grinders and sites to be determined. And you can find me on Twitter at LeoHowell8, the number 8 at the end, or you can tweet at Fantasy Gameplan, which is the Twitter account for this show. And so we will interact with you there. We'll answer your questions either on the show or during the week. Definitely get in touch with us and check out Matt at his website, which is
thebackyardbanter.com. There's really nothing going on over there lately, though.
You post these.
Huh?
Right? You post these.
Yeah, I do post these.
So that is something going on.
Right, yeah. Other than that, not much else.
And we get to plug it. There's stuff on there that people can read, like your number rankings and.
Yeah. The jersey number rankings, the quarterback typology is something that I reference. That's up on Backyard Banter that I reference a lot. So yeah, there's certainly
there's timeless stuff on there that people can go read if they want to. I mean, reception perception is timeless.
That as well. You could see the optimism of Cordero Patterson. How that all started.
You can see why he's been wrong about Cordero Patterson for 2 months. I'm surprised you didn't put him in the DFS lineup. I'm really surprised.
No, well, I wanted to control myself.
Good.
I'm proud of you.
Proud of you. You still got your Jordan Cameron in there, but I'm okay with that. So.
Good. Better be.
And I got my old wide receiver in there. So.
Happy medium. See, we're not just giving you fantasy advice. We're giving you life and relationship advice.
And on that note, we will bring this one to a close. For Matt, I am Leo. Have a great week. Hit us up on Twitter with any questions that you have, and we will be back next week to talk more fantasy football.